Good morning and welcome to our live talk program. This is Lloyd Grubb here, your host on Revive Reform Radio, doing our live talk program covering current events on this year Thursday morning. And this morning I'm looking at a topic, in the days of these kings. In the days of these kings is our current events topic. So welcome again. Hopefully the blessed night rest and you're ready to take on today's challenges and grab some opportunities. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, I thank you for the blessings of this day, for the blessings of your word, and for the important messages you send to us, dear Lord, to guide us along as to where we are in the in time. May you bless us, dear Lord, as we study together and as I share these things for Christ's sake. Amen. So I'm looking at this topic here, in the days of these kings. In the days of these kings is taken from Daniel. Daniel chapter 2 is the statement in we're going to be looking at mainly. It's a backdrop in my mind, and it's in verse 44. This very important passage of scripture in my mind, the basis of much of these things that we understand in the Bible when it comes on to prophecy. So Daniel chapter 2 verse 44, prominent in my mind, and I'm going to show you why in the next few minutes here together, the next hour together here. So in the days of these kings, massive, because what I'm really talking about here is what's going on in England with the Brexit. I'm going to show you from prophecy, from the Bible, how important this is, and it's how an important event and always been an important event. So I have two concepts I'm going to be trying to tie together with this. So I want you to listen and take note and think, and if you can, respond, share some thoughts with me here on this very important topic, in the days of these kings. So I'm going to read first for you Daniel chapter 2 verse 40 through 45. Then I have two articles. Well, one is a piece, article, and then one is just an explanation of the British Constitution, the Constitution of the United Kingdom. And so you'll see how important this is and how these things play out when it comes on to biblical prophecy or what's happening. So in the days of these kings, Daniel chapter 2 verse 40 through 44. So this is now the what you call the prophecy of end time kingdoms, and how it goes from Babylon to the end, and which kingdom will be ruling the world at the end of time, and how this plays out in our modern history. So Daniel chapter 2 verse 40 is the continuation where Daniel is explaining the meaning of the prophecy and what will be taking place in our time, which is phenomenal how long range this prophecy is. So notice in Daniel 2 verse 40 it says, "And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise." So notice there's a consistent emphasis on breaking pieces, and the monarchy here in view, or the kingdom in view, is Rome, or what we call Italy in modern times. But Rome would be the capital or the main city that the world was ruled from that king. But part of the interest here is this breaking pieces. And when you study modern countries and how they're formulated, you find out real quickly that most modern countries, especially in the Middle East and the West, is formulated by Italians, the Romans, and to a less extent, but to a certain degree, you could throw in there the Spaniards, the British, and so forth. So this is how the system was developed, and this is how they developed it. It's breaking in pieces. But when you go to Africa, you see Africa broken up. It was not just broken up by the modern European empire. This has been breaking up for millennia, for over 1,000 years, but primarily by Rome, but not Rome in its secular form, but in its religious secular form, which is what we call the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church. And also, if you think about the Middle East, even our modern time, when Europe, after the World War I, World War II, was primarily World War II, they broke it up. They basically, what we consider as, I think it's Syria, Lebanon, and another country there, they basically broke it up and said, we're going to break it up in pieces and divide it this way. And you could just go country after country, and it's amazing how even look at the protests right now going on in Hong Kong, and you see that was something that was a dispute between China and Britain, because Britain was in major control of those areas. So it is so fascinating when you really look at this. I ain't even going to talk about this. I was just going to read it for context. But this is a study in itself. You can go and look at world history and see how this one little verse here is human history when it comes on to kingdoms and empires and countries. And they will go into somewhere like Iraq and Iran and just split it. And then not only split it, but split it. Notice they'll split it. The Europeans will split a country. Like let's do India, Pakistan, Kashmir, pure war, non-stop war. That's all British doing. This just create a problem. They just go on a map and say, we're going to draw a line right here, and there's going to be bloodbath. But hey, you guys take care of it, chaps, and they move on. Fascinating how they do this. And again, you and I are not doing it, so I don't know if it was as simplistic as that or it was callous as that, but the end result as we see is war. But you go and look at many of these areas where they have this type of split, and here's the interesting. Not only this is why I think the text overemphasize this breaking up, because they will go ahead and break a country up, so Iraq, Iran, and all that, but then they'll break it up internally by saying we're going to take the smaller group to rule over the larger group. So you have Shiite, you have the Shiite, and then you have the I forget all of a sudden, but the other group that Saddam Hussein was part of, and then that's a split. And then you go to, say, a country in Africa, and they do the same thing. This group rule over that group, and then you have constant turmoil. You pit one group against the other. This is where we get a lot of our concepts of racism from, where you kind of pit two groups against the other, and then one group subjugate the other group, and so forth. So you look at a lot of the wars, and you find out it's based upon this type of stuff, this breaking pieces, this splitting. So notice it, break in pieces, subdue all things, iron break it in all these things, and it shall break in piece and bruise. Repeat over and over again so you can see the breaking pieces, the bruise, the stuff. Studying itself, we're not here for that. Hopefully I didn't throw you off, because as I say, you come here to hear something different, that would be different, right? Now notice in verse 41, and whereas thou sawest the feet of toes and part of potter's clay, and part iron, the kingdom shall be divided, and there shall be in it the strength of iron, for as much as you sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. So many people kind of try to understand what it is. This is straightforward, I believe. If you study prophecy and you understand the symbols, because remember, these are symbols explaining what happened in real life. And what you find is that there is an element of religiosity within these empires that make them not like pagan Rome. So pagan Rome was just brutality and bruising and destroying and breaking totally. When we talk about the modern Rome, the 10 toes with the clay, we're talking about an element of religiosity or morality mixed in, and because of that it is not as powerful, and the power is not as in it as it was before. And so what I'm going to is most naturally what's going on with the Brexit, and part of this is the economic weakness. The strength is not there. The strength is more in America, not in European countries. As a matter of fact, you think about World War I, World War II, you needed quote unquote allied force, but you really needed America to come in and save the day. So, but the lust is to get back to that iron. But the Bible says never will happen. I'll read a text for you in a second. So notice here again, first the sawest, the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay, part iron. Now, many people have even observed that in modern times, one of the things that we use to make like skyscrapers and stuff like that is this blend, and our buildings, this blend of clay and iron, our bridges and so forth and so on. So it's a blend. The bridge could be all metal, but the foundation is cast in clay or in cement, in sand and all that mixture. We keep moving. Just side note. Verse 42, and as the toes and the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves amongst the seed of men, and they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And so you know the story of this aim to try to unify Europe by trying to do all kind of maneuvers with marriages and all this type of stuff, and never really work. And still trying to do other things like with European Union, still not working. And why I'm talking about what's going on with Brexit that's happening in Britain, because notice it's Britain that plays this kind of breakup role. I don't know if it's because they have this isolationist mentality, because they're an island, the UK. I don't know if that's what it is, but it seems like they always play that role. It's almost like a family, and within the family, certain people behave a certain behavior, and we see this. So if you notice here, they're not going to be able to be as strong. So notice here, so it's the iron mixed with miry clay in verse 43, and they shall mingle themselves among the seed of men, and they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron shall not mix with clay. So most of the European monarchy across Europe, and even some of Russia, were our relatives. It never really worked. Even within that, you could not pull it together, because if they could pull it together, they would be able to go back to the former days, which is what I think everybody's lusting after. But when you do this, there's a problem. More on that in a second. So notice here now my main text, verse 44, which is just so significant in my mind. In the days of these kings. So notice, in the days of these kings. So whatever is going to happen next is going to happen while this entity still is in existence. While this entity is still on the face of the earth and have sway, have power. Right? So that's what we're looking for. We're trying to say, okay, something's going to happen in the days of these kings. I'm going to read it in a second. But they're going to still have power. But one thing then is not that they will have power, but they won't be as strong as the Roman Empire, where all 10 of them was leading, in conjunction with Rome. They'll have power, but the power, they'll be part strong, part weak. And so is the power still there? Notice now, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, so not China. But it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So we believe that the last empires that are on the face of the earth, as we see it in its current configuration, are going to be the last empire up until the second coming of Christ. There will be no Brazil rising to power, no Chile is not going to be the next monarch that rule the world. Sorry. It's not going to be any country from Africa. It's not going to be any China or Russia. The sway of power will remain in the hands of Europe. But when I say Europe, I throw in there America. Hopefully before I end, I'll explain why. But our focus today is on Britain. Because Britain is very significant in my mind for what it does. As a matter of fact, the language we're speaking right now, at least I'm trying to speak, is British language. Is the imperial language. So it's interesting that the imperial language is not Italian, probably unless you do medicine or you're trying to study, certain old languages. It's not Latin. It's not none of that. It is actually English is the world's language. So Britain played a significant role, and so it's always interesting to see out of all the kings and the empires that are connected, because people say, well, why were you to America? Because of the NAFTA. America has an agreement that they're part of this world rulership, and they're the kingmakers around the globe. They act in the same behavior as the European because they're primarily European. So when you look at this now, I'm going to read it again, and then I'm going to go to 45, and then we're going to jump over to 2 articles. And I'm going to show you how this is playing out right in front of your very eyes. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. So as I said, this is where I get that idea. Ain't nobody getting after this. Europe and then nothing. There's all these other kingdoms from the Middle East and so forth. All other great kingdoms, even Israel one time was great. Egypt was great. There's nothing else after this. We have here, and then it's heaven or hell for all of us. Hopefully for all of us here is heaven, and that's it. So notice here, shall not left out of people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So notice the ultimate kingdom that breaks in pieces all the kingdoms is the God of heaven kingdom. That kingdom come. Now verse 45 says, for as much as thou sawest the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it break in pieces the iron, so iron has to go first, most actually because the kingdoms are going to be destroyed in reverse order. The brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God had made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure. Now, this is important to note because it's saying it's sure. That means, I remember years back when they were talking about EU, and I remember they're talking about EU, and at one point Britain was for it, and then at another point Britain said, well, we kind of join, but we're not going to 100% join. And I was like, man, this Daniel 2 verse 40 through 45 is rock solid, because it says, look, Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, this dream is certain. And for 2,000 something years, this dream has been on the march and has never been broken. And even when you think, okay, after the breakup of the European Empire, they would say it will be officially somewhere about 538. It never came back again, no matter what they did, no matter, even when Hitler said, man, remember when Hitler said, we're going to, think about it, when Hitler, and then I'm going to go to my reading, but this is so much here because this is a whole long information. So when Hitler says, look, we're going to go and we're going to take over Europe, right? Remember, he literally almost marched right through France. It was almost like ran it over. Now, you think France, I always look at France as very important because France was the one that put the Pope on the throne in 538. It just demolished the last kingdom and destroyed them and took away their head and murdered that one. But it was France who put the kibosh on the Pope and gave him a deadly wound in 1798. So when you look at that, you think, okay, so probably it's going to be France. And yet it was Britain. It same thing when it come on to even Napoleon. It was, again, Britain. But also it was Russia on the other side. So those are important to note what's going on the other side. And the Bible deals with that. We're not going to be able to deal with all of that. But you see this idea here. It's always that, there's always these kingmakers or these king breakers. So we notice here it says the dream is certain. So if you knew, like I know, and I believe this dream is certain, you know that EU is not going to work. It might seem like it's going to work. And then at the last moment, I remember Britain says, look, we're not going to be 100% part of it. Now Britain is saying we want out because the dream is certain. And you have to know what you're looking at. Then you can see how certain the dream is. Now, notice here, now I'm going to read this article. And this article, I have two little pieces I want to read to you here. I don't know if they're little pieces, but two articles. And I want to show you now what's going on now with you heard about it where Boris Johnson, I think his name, the Prime Minister of Britain, asks the Queen to suspend or to delay the start of the Parliament until I think October, sometime in October. So the article doesn't give you all the information, but notice here this idea here of this, we're going to leave the EU, and the Queen now steps in and play the part, because somebody would say none of these European empires are run by the kings or the queens. This is what somebody would say, right? Because they would say, Lord, if you're saying that the vision is so rock solid, Britain is run by the Prime Minister. And then I say, really? Because what I'm going to read to you here, I'm going to show you that it is not that clear. Because somebody say, oh no, you're wrong, bro. And the Bible is wrong. The Bible is false. Because the Bible, Daniel got it wrong. But what I'm going to read you here, I'm going to show you, is more convoluted than what that I even thought. But I just know the Bible is right. So I just say, hey, look, it's good. Now, here's the evidence here to show you it is a little bit more tricky than that. And this is because for years, this is two things I'm going to answer in this article. For years, I used to wonder, why is it that Jamaica, which is where I was born, didn't have a clear constitution? I couldn't understand why. It was never taught. And so I'm going to answer this. This article is going to explain that to you. So that's a side note. And this idea of the queen, who she is, what is our relationship to her, because she's the true head of state of Jamaica. There's somebody who run the government. That means fix the road, take out the garbage, do the dirty work, so to speak. The prime minister does that. But who is the head of state? The true head of state is the queen. But you never get a clear explanation as to what is her role. It is like a unspoken rule. All right, now here we go to this article. And it's from NBC News, and it's written by Alexander Smith. And it is yesterday. It says, the Queen isn't meant to get involved in UK's politics. Boris Johnson just dragged her in. For 1 month before one of the most important moments in Britain's constitutional history, Parliament will not be sitting. That is quite extraordinary. As largely ceremonial head of state, Queen Elizabeth II is not accustomed to being dragged into the messy heart of British politics. But on Wednesday, that's exactly where she found herself. At a secretive meeting in Balmoral Castle, the fairy tale royal resident in Scotland, ministers sent by Parliament, Boris Johnson, asked the Queen, which is 93 years old, which is again a fascinating thing, to suspend Parliament for a month. The world's longest serving living monarch had little choice but to agree to prorogue Parliament, the formal name for the suspension. And this has triggered what many across the political spectrum say is an unprecedented constitutional crisis that threatens the value of British democracy. Johnson said he made this request because the current parliament term has gone on too long and he wants to launch a bold, ambitious domestic legislative agenda. Most believe he wants to make sure lawmakers don't come back from summer recess with enough time to thwart his plans for Brexit, which is currently due to happen in October 31st. Some think he wants to goad them into triggering a general election, which he would likely fight as a populist champion of Brexit. Either way, Johnson stands widely accused of exploiting a huge grey area left by UK's lack of a single constitutional document and of using the supposed apolitical Queen as a tool to achieve his short-term Brexit goal. So what you note there, and this is going to be where my focus is, that Britain itself doesn't have a codified, very clear constitution. It itself doesn't have one. So if you go to the British people and say, what is your rights and what is how the government's supposed to function? They'd be like, well, it's not very clear. I think there's a parliament, there's a prime minister, and then there's the Queen, and then there's some other bodies. But how do they function, judicial, all that? Well, it functions. Keep reading there. Either way, to ask her to prorogue in these circumstances is in fact an abuse of executive power, says Meg Russell, a professor and director of the Constitution Unit in the University College London. Members of Johnson's own parliament and beyond called the move a constitutional outrage and profoundly undemocratic. John Mayer, a former conservative prime minister, has compared Johnson to Charles I, the 17th century king whose suspension of parliament led to the English Civil War and ultimately his own beheading. In the US, President Donald Trump is head of state and head of government. In the UK, however, Johnson is the head of government and the Queen is the head of state. The power resides in the government and the House of Parliament. In normal circumstances, the Queen's role is more ceremonial. One of her functions is to open and close Parliament with the passage of every legislative cycle, which normally lasts a year. These occasions are ablaze with velvet robes, wigs, and all other paraphernalia associated with the British ruling class, which is interesting to watch in video. Because we are a constitutional monarch. Officially, the Queen has to make some decision with regard to Parliament and government, and has to therefore take advice from the Prime Minister, says Tim Bale, a political professor at Queen's Mary University of London. I'll pause here also. The Queen is also the head of the church. So the Queen normally have to meet with the Prime Minister and with the head of the Church of England. So interesting enough. So I think it's not, all of that stuff is not clear because that's not like the way it is in America. But years deep into Brexit turmoil that has gripped most aspects of political and social life, Britain is a long way past normal. Whereas the Queen normally prorogue Parliament for a few days, Johnson asked her to suspend it for almost 5 weeks. He is, as it were, using the rules, or some would say bending the rules to get what he wants, Bell said. That alone would be unusual, but it is doubly so because it comes while the House of Commons is trying to deal with Brexit, its biggest crisis in at least a generation. Lawmakers aren't set for a showdown next month as they attempt to stop. Lawmakers are set for a showdown as they attempt to stop the minister from taking Britain out of Europe without a deal, something Johnson say he will consider despite dire economic warning from the government itself. It looks very unusual for you to shut down a democratic legislature during a period of political crisis, says Jack Simon Card, a former constitutional law specialist in the House of Commons Library, and provide briefing to lawmakers. For 1 month before one of the most important moments in Britain's constitutional history, Parliament will not be sitting. That is quite extraordinary. So I keep reading, but I just want you to know, even as I cover this material, that the idea that this even idea of getting out is extraordinary, because I really believe that's what God saw. They will not cleave together, no matter what they try, and there will be extraordinary things will happen. That has happened over the millennia, I should say over the over the centuries, to keep it broken up. Over a millennia, because it's over 1,000 years. So notice here, and almost wrap this up, part of the problem as I see is that the UK does not have a codified constitution. Remember, and if you know me personally, I've talked about this, that I just couldn't understand why even places like Jamaica, there's not a clear constitution. Nothing was taught us. And then I start realizing, well, if you understand that Britain doesn't have a constitution, and this will be clearly shown in the next, in a clear way. I mean, they have something, but it's kind of hodgepodge. Then that's why even other countries that they rule and the Queen sits as head of, they don't have a clear thing itself. Continue reading. It is also very old. This means that rather than being contained in one document, is not codified. It sprawls messily across dusty tomes and reams of legislation. It is also very old and leaves a lot of room for interpretation by those who wield it. The political historian Peter Hennessy called this the good chap theory. Lawmakers and bureaucrats understand the tacit rule and the gentleman's agreement that underpin British politics. In asking the Queen to suspend Parliament, Johnson is accused of ignoring the unspoken promises and using them for his own benefits. The Constitution relies on key players respecting precedents and traditions, says Russell at University College London. By ignoring precedent in this matter, particularly at a time of crisis, the Prime Minister is arguably acting unconstitutionally. For many, Johnson has contravened a basic constitutional rule in the UK that says that the government should not politicize the Queen. In asking her to prorogue Parliament, hopefully I'm getting that right, he exercised something called prerogative power, which dates from when the monarch ruled the country and crucially cuts out the involvement of lawmakers. Now, prerogatory power is what we just read. Now, prorogatory or prorogation is a good example of part of UK's unwritten constitution that previous governments have chosen not to manipulate, according to a briefing from the Institute of Government, a think tank. Leaders before Johnson have avoided doing this because it would undermine trust and could be used by their opponents against them in the future. So you can see the thing there where they're saying, look, if he uses the monarch and get her involved, then if somebody gets into power, they could say, hey, Queen, do this for us. And then she could go ahead and exercise her, a monarchical power. But remember, as I read before, in the days of these kings, and these kings still there, but they're there more ceremonial. But notice it says here, there is no clear defined role that she's playing other than, she's ceremonial, she opens Parliament and closes. Well, if you can open and close a thing, I think you have power. And notice they say also that she normally acts upon their advice. So normally she says something based upon what they advise her. Now, I think in my post that I was watching a little interview with Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and he was saying that he wanted to shut down Parliament for a little bit or suspend it so that they could put forward a bold legislation for domestic policy. Now, that in itself kind of makes sense anyhow. Because if you're Brexiting, if you're going to leave European Union altogether, because they're primarily tied into European Union by, not I think by government, but by finances, financial connection. They're not part of Europe in that sense. They have their own sterling or the British pound. So they're going to exit altogether and go on their own. So this kind of would make sense, even though it's probably some level of showmanship and all that. But I would say it makes sense. If you're going to break altogether, you'd have to have some meetings and have time to put forward a bold initiative of how we're going to survive Brexit, because we're leaving. We're not financially tied to EU anymore, and we weren't supposed to, because God says we're not supposed to. They're not saying that. So I want to read this other piece to you now to make it clearer now. This is now a piece on just to tie up some loose ends here to explain Britain's unwritten constitution, and this is taken from UK, an article from out of UK. All right, just call it that way. The website is bl.uk, and it's on Magna Carta. All right, and it's the Britain Unwritten Constitution, and it's written by Robert Blackburn. All right, so unlike most modern states, Britain does not have a codified constitution, but an unwritten one, form of acts of parliament, court judgment, and conventions. This is the way we do business. This is the way we do business, right? Professor Robert Blackburn explained the system, including Magna Carta's place within it, and asks whether the UK should now have a written constitution. For most people, especially abroad, the United Kingdom does not have a constitution at all in the sense of most commonly used around the world. A document of fundamental importance setting out the structure of government and its relation with its citizens. All modern states, saving only UK, New Zealand, and Israel, have adopted a document constitution of this kind, the first and most complete model being that of the United States of America in 1788. However, in Britain, we certainly say that we have a constitution, but it is one that exists in an abstract sense, comprising of host of diverse laws, practices, conventions that have evolved over long periods of time. The key landmark is the Bill of Rights, 1689, which established the supremacy of Parliament over the Crown following the forcible replacement of King James II, which is not the one that we're familiar with or famously known, William III, Mary, in a glorious revolution. Glorious, I don't know what's glorious. From a comparative perspective, we have what is known as an unwritten constitution, although some prefer to describe it as an uncodified, on the basis that many of our laws of the constitution nature are in fact written down in acts of parliament or law reports of courts. This aspect of the British Constitution is its unwritten nature is most distinguishing characteristics. So there's not a clear document, there's just stuff. Continue reading here. It says another characteristic of the unwritten constitution is the special significance of political customs known as conventions, which oil the wheel of the relationship between the ancient institution of the state. These are unwritten rules of constitutional practice, vital to our politics, the working of government, but not committed into law or any written form of at all. The very existence of the office of Prime Minister or head of government is purely conventional. Isn't that interesting? So is the rule upon which he or she is appointed, being whoever commands the confidence of the House of Commons, the majority party leader, or head of the coalition of parties. So I'll pause there. Hopefully you get that. So what he's basically saying here, Mr. Blackburn here, he's saying just how they decide who's the prime minister is not something that is written down on paper. It is not so the popular. You vote for the party and the party select who's the guy. Whoever the head of the party that becomes the prime minister. But that is not even written in paper. That's just like a gentleman's agreement. That's to me what I understand what the British Constitution is. It is just, it's not codified. It's just a gentleman's agreement or gentlewomen and men agreement. We agree amongst ourselves. This is how we do the business. So if somebody say, hey, let's not do it that way anymore, then you could have a crisis because there's no clear way. It's just, okay, we do it this way and everybody agree. And we shake hand on it, right? Continue now to the monarch. The monarch is one of the three components of parliament, shorthand for the queen in parliament, along with commons and lords. In legal theory, the queen has absolute and judicial, unchallengeable power to refuse her assent to a bill passed by the two houses of parliament. However, convention dictates the precise opposite, and in practice, she automatically gives her assent to any government bill that has been duly passed and agreed by parliament. So I pause there because that's fascinating. So no constitution, no clear way of how does a bill pass. I'm sure you watched that video or read that. Like, how does a bill pass in America? You go to the House, you go to the Senate, and you go to the president. He signs it, and if somebody challenges it, it goes to the Supreme Court. If it passed the constitutional test based upon the Supreme Court opinion and vote, then it's the law of the land, and that's how it's going to be. Well, here you go in Britain. They say, well, the two houses pass it, and then the queen says it's good, but she never really says it's good. It's just automatically assumed if the two houses pass it, she's in agreement. But what if the queen one day say, I don't like that, change that? Then you would have a crisis because they say, well, she's absolute. Fascinating the way they run. Another important convention, so then she's definitely the queen then. Another important convention is that the government ministers must have a seat in parliament and is a case of Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer, specifically Westminster system of Parliament government. Specifically in the House of Commons, in order to hold office. This is vital aspect of what is known as Westminster system of Parliament government, providing a direct form of executive responsibility and accountability to the legislature. So it's not written in paper or in stone. It's just, this is the way we operate, and we shake on it and we good. The written document of the unwritten constitution. There is irony in the fact that the United Kingdom today does not have a written constitution, yet historically it has had a rich heritage of pioneering constitutional charters and documents. First and foremost is the Magna Carta, 1215, the Great Charter of Liberties of England. This established the principle that our rulers, at that time the king, could not do whatever they like, but were subject to the law as agreed with the barons they governed. This simple concept laid the foundation for constitutional government and freedom under the law. Insofar as Magna Carta was the first great public act of the nation, it also established the direction of travel for a political system towards representative institutions and much later democracy itself. And I pause there. There's more to read, as I say. If you're interested in the rest of that, you can find it at just probably type in Britain Unwritten Constitution, and it says bl.uk Magna Carta Britain Unwritten Constitution. So very important. So this whole concept, a lot of these things are coming out of Britain, but it in itself did not, it only went so far, because what this is proving is that technically the Queen is supposed to not be able to assert power like that, but she can. So in this situation, it shows that she's still the Queen, even though it's supposed to be ceremonial, but this is the understanding. And there'll be fights over it, but there'll be fights over a lot of things. So I put that out there, and I'm going to go back to the text now. So think about all of that, and think about how what we're looking at here with what we call Brexit, how it lines up now. So I'm going to go back now to Daniel, and I'll go back to I want to share some more text before time is out. Time together. So when you look at Daniel, it talks about this is Europe we're talking about in Daniel chapter 2. So just to be clear, we're not talking about at this point any other nation. We're talking about who rules the world. There's no colony. There's no entity outside of, it was just Europe ruled the world. You look at Africa, you could remap Africa and just say which European monarchy control which country. You could just map the world like that. You could go to the South, the whole Americas. You say which monarchy, which European monarchy rule these lands, and then you go back. You go to the Middle East, and you go to parts of Asia where we're talking about India, Pakistan, all these places. You go to parts in the Middle East, as I say, and Italy run Israel, all that stuff. So you look at the world, you could remap it as to which empire runs what and who gave it power to do what. And you can see Daniel chapter 2, verse 40 to 45. Then you go to Revelation 13, which I'll read a little bit about of it. And you can see that the only difference is you have NAFTA. Not NAFTA. I think I said that earlier. It's the European American Agreement. Messed it up. So when you look at that, you can see these two empires, and they run the world, and they're in charge of everything everywhere. They're what we call the economic system, the stock market system, all of that system. So let's read now again, Daniel 2, and I'm just going to go straight to Daniel 2, and I'm going to go to verse 44, which is my main point, which is my topic is in the days of these kings, which mean in the time when Europe is still in dominance. Notice it says, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. and it shall stand forever. And I think for context, I should read verse 43 again. And it says, whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seeds of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So they'll mingle themselves. They'll do things like World War One, World War Two. Napoleon will get brave. In the middle part of the Dark Ages, they'll start to intermarry with each other. In our modern time, they'll do EU, and Britain will be like, we out of there. Now, why is Britain significant in my mind? Because Britain always played this role. If you think about it, Britain was, when the Lord says he's going to cut the persecution of the saints or of the Christians in the Dark Ages by the Catholic Church short, he did this. One of the ways he did this was through Martin Luther, the great reformer. He weakened the hand of the powers of Europe and started to even break it up more. The clay element became a dividing factor. But also we find that in the King James, where we get the famous King James Bible, he was pressed on by a different reason. But again, he played a significant role in weakening the hand of the Catholic Church and basically started to bring about his demise. What he did, he basically had a disagreement with the Catholic Church over wanting to remarry. And because of that, he said, I'm going to start my own church, basically, in my own kingdom. Then he gave the Bible to the people by bringing about what we call the King James Version Bible. And that was it. The Bible to the people. Weak in the Catholic Church, because where there's Bible, the Catholic Church have no power. Where there's ignorance of Bible, the Catholic Church have power. As a matter of fact, the devil has power. And so you see this happen, and you see Britain play that role back in the 1600s, and that is the time when we already had started finding the New World, and where then America came about after that, in 100 and something years after. But you see that it's like a setup, like it's a 1, 2, 3 punch to bring about certain changes. But these changes, one of the big catalysts for these changes was Britain. So this is why I'll be always interested in what's going on over there across the water, across the pond. Because at one point, remember, when all this started, the Pope gave power to Spain primarily, and I can't remember if it was Portugal, but one of these other European nations with Spain got most of the power to conquer the New World and stuff like that. Set up colonies even, in different places. But end up Britain got I guess, decide we're going to jump in and put the kibosh. And this is why many of us speak English now. We don't speak Spanish, many of us, because of that. And why America is in the play. So you think about that again. It's so many examples in history of where they played that role. And as I say, I don't know if it's because they're island over there by themselves, or because they have so many colonies, so they believe that they can still connect. Because it's a trigger that she could pull, because she sits in some way over, these entities. So anyhow, so when you look at this and you see this idea in the days of these kings, that these kings are still in charge. These kings are what control the mercantile exchange, all the different, where you deal with diamonds. You think about diamonds leaving Africa, almost most of it goes straight to, I think, Switzerland or one of these countries, and then it comes to the rest of the world. It's tulips. If you want flowers, I can't remember if it's Denmark or one of these countries, goes there first, then it goes to the rest of the world. It is the control of commerce. I'm going to show you that in a few minutes if I have time. And you see the power, but it says they'll try to, if they could get all these economies together, they could become significant and powerful. But they can't cleave together. They always war amongst each other, and they always break up. And we see Brexit is a threat, that not even financially, because they're not politically connected with Europe. They're just financially, and they want to break this all together. Keep it in mind. And they don't even have the same currency. So even that connection is limited, because some people say, oh yeah, but they're connected financially. Yeah, as trading partners to a certain degree, but they're breaking that to protect themselves. Keep in mind, this is what Britain always do. This is nothing new. All right, Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through 3. So remember, as we study prophecy, we understand that line upon line, here a little, there a little, and one thing builds upon another, in that the Bible is revealing, it's a revelation. There's something probably new you need to understand, but the new doesn't destroy the old. It just builds on it. So remember, it was 10 toes on the image. So it's 2 feet, 10 toes. The 10 toes, without me going through all the Bible texts, because of the sake of time, over a few 10 minutes. Out of the 10 toes, 3 were destroyed, plucked up by the Catholic Church. France became one of the major Catholics to pluck up one of the toes. All right, the last toe, I should say. So just want to mention that for other reasons, other study and other events, why we watch France, the true pagan entity in Europe. Bible refer to France as being Sodom and being Egypt. It combines those two elements so perfectly. You look at, worse than, it's like Sodom and it's like Egypt. So to me, it's worse than both of them. Fascinating. Anyhow, so Revelation 13 verse 1 through 3 says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon his horn 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy." So if you studied Daniel and other parts of Daniel, you realize that Europe was primarily, Western European Empire was 10 kingdoms, including Rome, England, Britain, Spain, so forth. And out of these 10, 3 were plucked up. So if you study history, you find out that one of the 3 that were plucked up was actually part of the northern part of Italy. It was a kingdom in itself, and it got plucked up. And he had rulership over landmass, and he got plucked up. But it still exists, similar to like the Basque separatists or the Basque people. But they have no kingdom. They have probably a parliament, just like if you look at Britain. Britain has United Kingdom, but the head of United Kingdom is one head. There's parliaments, but there's one head. The head is the Queen. But Scotland, Ireland, Wales, all of them report to her. She's the head, not Boris Johnson. And keep that in mind. So it's one head. So she's one of the heads that still stays around. And that's what it is. So you find these distinct entities: Spain, Portugal, France, Germany. And those are the powerhouse in Europe, and still to this day. So this entity now, when it comes up towards the end of time, and it's going to join what we call NATO. That's the proper N word. What we call NATO today is Revelation 13. The whole Revelation 13 is basically, you could say Revelation 13 is NATO. That's how I look at it. If you can show me something different, I'll investigate. But NATO is our modern leadership of the world, Europe and America. So, but here it's describing Europe, Western Europe. What happened? Again, there's a switch, and in the switch, it describes some elements that happened to create this new entity. This new entity now have 7 heads. It doesn't have what you call 10. But notice here it's going to say, it upon his a beast rise above the sea and have 7 heads, but he has 10 horns. Remember, horn represent the power. So the head is removed, the horn is still there. So this is why I find it fascinating, because if you notice how Europe function, that place like Scotland will have a parliament, but they really have no head. The head is still the queen. Very fascinating. The head got chopped off, so to speak, and the queen becomes the head. So we have 7 heads, 10 horns. And upon the horn, 10 crowns. The crowns are still there. If you see when the queen entered parliament, if I remember clearly, she doesn't wear the crown. Somebody walks with the crown on a pillar. All right, so that crown represents, I'm the head of this. I'm the head of the United Kingdom. But the crown is not on her head. I don't know why. I think they put it on after she sits down. I'm going to have a look at it again. I haven't looked at it in a while. But look at it when you have time. I think she puts it on after. But she's the head, and she has a crown. And upon his head, the name blasphemy. So you look at this, it's like blasphemous. Because remember, she is the head of the church. How is she going to be the head of the church? In her is combined church and state. Keep reading. Different study. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet was as the feet of a bear. And his mouth was the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So when we talk about great authority, you go to places, you be like, Aruba. What is Aruba? Aruba, I think, is Netherlands, right? It's like this little island out in nowhere, and Aruba is controlled by Netherlands. Great authority. Well, where did he get it from? He get it from not a good source. And verse 33, and I saw one of his head as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. So this is after the healing. What we're seeing here is the end product of what happened after the healing. And all the world wandered after the beast. So we know which entity he's talking about, because France gave the wound to the Catholic Church by arresting and the Pope dying in custody. He got a wound, but he got some restorative power, which we modernly will call Vatican. And its wound is healed, or healing, but we would say it's healed, and is now a prominent entity, which would be the Pope. But he doesn't have state power because he lost that. But technically he has power. Put it this way, he's like the Queen of England. He's the King of Italy, and he has a Prime Minister. That's how I say it. So notice there again, in the days of those kings, this is what it is. Now, if you read Revelation 13:11, it introduced what we call America, and introduced America as being part of this NATO alliance that runs the world. And this is the days of those kings. So why am I emphasizing those kings? Because it says it will not go to another people. That means you can put your, I don't believe in putting money in anything, but you can put your money that there's not going to be an empire that runs the world called China. It's not going to happen. Because after NATO, we go straight to heaven. There's no other empire, basically. This is the last empire. I remember, now why is this significant to you and I? Because of the time, I'm not going to be able to go to the rest of the text. Because all these nations, this empire, this NATO, they're in trouble. They're in decline. All this Brexit thing, really what's going on is that the money is not there. The wars are not working. Iraq war didn't pay off. Afghanistan war definitely didn't pay off. All this other stuff going on in the Middle East with Syria didn't pay off. It's a very expensive war. And NATO is losing money on it crazily. And it's breaking the bank. America is on $1 trillion in debt. Britain, all that stuff that they did is not working. And so all this stuff is to try to save themselves. This is why Make America Great and Boris Johnson is like Britain's Trump, because the problem is not really is Britain Trump, I believe, is the problem is to save the system. But the system is going. So what does that mean for you? That means to me this is like, as somebody said, we're in the toenails. It's the weakness is showing and it's unraveling, but it's not going to unravel so that China take over. No, I believe that they're going to play a significant role in this time, because they are. But not in the sense of they're going to be the next on the block. It's going to just simply mean that there's going to be some movement in there, and that's another study, different observation. So keep in mind, in the days of these kings, God's going to set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. In other words, when these kingdoms start to unravel, you know that we're coming close to the end of time. It's one of the end time signs. Now, when NATO starts to unravel, we see this. It's a massive. I mean, you pick up the news and it is fascinating. And for me, I read the news, and this is a current event in itself, because, as I say, it's a sign that there's trouble in Europe. Just in case you missed what I was saying, that they have an emergency, and the emergency is massive. The same emergency they have in America, the same emergency they have in Europe, and they're trying to maneuver to save themselves. And to maneuver, all kind of maneuver. But everything they're doing, they're not doing the right thing. They're doing the wrong thing. You know, you save yourself by doing righteousness. You break off your sin and you show mercy to the poor. That's what they're supposed to do. That's not what they're doing. They try to maneuver, all kind of financial maneuver, and to try to keep the thing together. But the alliance is breaking. And Revelation 13, ultimately, it breaks when they decide that they're going to blaspheme God by having a national son-in-law. This is why NATO will be able to pull it off. Because they'll be able to, the churches in Europe and America will join hands with the political leaders. And that's Revelation 18, verse 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they'll try to save the system by doing what Rome did back in the Dark Ages, by trying to save Rome, by turning it over to the pastors. And it plunged the world into the Dark Ages. What they'll do is trying to do the same thing by making an image to the beast. And the political people will join with the religious people, and the Christians and the Catholics will come together to save the system. But they will try to plunge the world into the Dark Ages. So we will go back to persecution, and God will step in and say, "Time's up. We're done." Sorry to explain it like that, but that's the fastest I could say it. But that's really what's coming, and that's what's going to happen. they're going to try to make a move to save the system, but you can't save the system unless you do the right thing. And righteousness is not their focus. Their focus is political and financial maneuver. And ultimately, in the end, if you read Revelation 13, verse 11 to the end to 18, you see that they'll try to do religious things, but immoral religious things against the righteous. And what will happen? It will implode the system altogether, because the system is dying because of immorality. It's not dying because of lack of money. It's dying because of lack of love and kindness and righteousness and the commandments of God. Wish I could say more. We talk more about this in the future. Let's pray. Our Father who art in heaven, I thank you for the blessings of your word, for the blessings of your guidance, for the clarity of your word, dear Lord. And I pray, dear Lord, that we might continue to study, look at what's going on, and we may be able to study precept upon precept. Bless us, we pray. Bless us with thy spirit and continue to guide us and open our eyes. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thanks again for being with me on Revive From Radio. Looking forward to talking to you again live tomorrow morning, where we should talk about wisdom for living. Until then, I pray that you may continue to walk with the King.